September 3, 1945. The transport truck rattled to a halt, its engine coughing into silence, and the men inside braced themselves against the metal benches. They had traveled for hours, maybe days. Time had become meaningless after the surrender. Through the canvas flaps, they could see dust rising in golden clouds, settling slowly in the afternoon light. One by one, they were ordered out, their feet hitting American soil with a heaviness that had nothing to do with weight. They were soldiers without honor, prisoners without a homeland, men who had been taught that this moment should never come. Death was preferable, death was expected, survival was shame. He was 31, though the war had carved him into something older. His uniform hung loose on a frame that hunger had whittled down, his hands calloused from years of gripping rifles and digging trenches. His face was weathered, eyes hollowed by sleepless nights and the images he could not unsee. He had fought across islands whose names he barely remembered, watched friends disappear into jungle darkness, felt the earth shudder beneath artillery fire that seemed to come from the sky itself. When the Emperor's voice had crackled over the radio, thin and distant, speaking words he had never imagined hearing, something inside him had broken cleanly, like bone. The camp stretched before them, rows of wooden barracks behind wire fences that gleamed in the sun. American guards stood at intervals, their rifles held casually, their faces neither cruel nor kind, just watchful. The 31-year-old scanned their expressions, searching for the hatred he had been promised. His officers had warned them. Capture meant torture, interrogation, humiliation so complete that death would be a mercy denied. The Americans, they had been told, did not take prisoners, they took revenge. But the guards simply gestured toward the barracks, their voices flat and procedural. Move.
Silence. The prisoners stared, forks frozen halfway to mouths, eyes wide with incomprehension. Letters? From children? The 31-year-old felt his chest tighten. It had to be a trick. Propaganda, perhaps. Or worse. Mockery disguised as kindness, cruelty softened to cut deeper. The guards moved through the rows, distributing envelopes. When one was placed before him, the 31-year-old stared at it as though it might explode. His name was written on the front in careful, blocky letters, the kind a child might use when trying their best. The paper was thin, slightly wrinkled, and smelled faintly of crayons. He did not open it, not then, not while others around him tore into theirs with trembling hands, pulling out pages covered in drawings and crooked sentences, not while some men began to weep openly, shoulders shaking, faces buried in their palms. He simply held it, feeling the weight of it, impossibly light and unbearably heavy at once. Later, when the lights had dimmed and the barracks settled into an uneasy quiet, he sat on his cot and turned the envelope over in his hands. The seal was simple, a child's tongue dampening the flap. He slid his thumb beneath it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was large and uneven, written in English with a Japanese translation scrawled beneath in what must have been a teacher's hand. At the top, a drawing, a stick figure holding a flag surrounded by flowers. The colors were bright, crayon reds and yellows and blues that seemed too vivid for the gray world he inhabited. He read slowly, his lips forming the translated words. Dear soldier, my name is Lucy. I am 8 years old. My teacher said you are far from home. I am sorry you are sad. Do you have a family? I have a dog named Biscuit. He is brown and likes to chase squirrels. Do you like dogs? I hope you are not scared. I hope you can go home soon. Your friend, Lucy. The 31-year-old stared at the words until they blurred. His hands began to shake. He read it again and again. Each time the sentences struck him like blows, not cruel but devastating in their innocence. I hope you are not scared. She hoped. This child, this enemy, hoped for him. His throat closed. He thought of his sister, who would have been 9 when he left. He thought of the children he had seen in villages, wide-eyed and silent, clutching their mothers' skirts as soldiers marched past. He thought of the children he had not seen, those swallowed by fire and rubble whose cries had echoed in his nightmares. And now here, a child on the other side of the world asked if he liked dogs. He folded the letter carefully, his fingers clumsy, and pressed it against his chest. Around him, others were reacting in ways they had not been trained for. One man laughed, high and broken, clutching a drawing of a house with smoke curling from the chimney. Another sat motionless, tears streaming down his face, a letter crumpled in his fist. A third stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky as though searching for answers in the stars. The 31-year-old did not sleep that night. He sat with Lucy's letter, reading it by the faint light that seeped through the cracks. Each word was a question he could not answer. Did he have a family? Yes. Did he like dogs? He had, once, before the war taught him that softness was weakness. Was he scared? Every moment of every day. Though not in the way Lucy might imagine.
In the days that followed, the letters became a quiet obsession. Men who had barely spoken now gathered in small groups, sharing their pages, comparing drawings. Some letters were simple, greetings and well wishes, stick figures waving. Others were more complex, asking questions that cut to the bone. "Why did you fight?" one child had written. "Do you have toys in Japan?" Another had drawn a picture of two children holding hands beneath a rainbow, with the words, "We are all friends," scrawled beneath. The 31-year-old received 3 more letters over the following weeks, each one from Lucy. She told him about her school, about a loose tooth that finally fell out, about a bird that had built a nest outside her window. Her words were unremarkable, the kind of chatter any child might offer, and yet they undid him piece by piece. In one letter, she asked, "Do you miss your home?" He stared at the question for an hour, the paper resting on his knee. How could he explain that home was not a place anymore, but a ghost? That the house he remembered might be ash? That even if the walls still stood, the man who left them was dead? He began to write back. The camp provided paper and pencils, and translators helped those who struggled with English. The 31-year-old's reply was short, carefully worded. "Dear Lucy, thank you for your letter. Yes, I miss my home very much. I do not have a dog, but my sister had a bird. It sang every morning. I hope your dog is well. Your friend." He did not sign his name. It felt too intimate, too real. When the letters were collected and sent, he felt a strange lightness, as though he had released something he had been carrying for too long. But the lightness did not last. At night, the guilt returned, heavier than before. What right did he have to correspond with a child, to speak of birds and sisters, when he had contributed to so much destruction? What right did he have to her kindness? The camp chaplain, an American with graying hair and a gentle voice, began visiting the barracks. He did not preach, did not demand. He simply sat with the men, offering cigarettes and quiet conversation. One evening, he sat beside the 31-year-old, watching the sun sink below the horizon. "You read the letters," the chaplain said. It was not a question. The 31-year-old nodded slowly. "They bother you?" Another nod. The chaplain was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "Mercy is harder to bear than judgment. Judgment confirms what we already believe about ourselves. Mercy asks us to believe something else." The 31-year-old turned the words over in his mind long after the chaplain left. Mercy. It was not a word he had been taught in training. Soldiers did not deal in mercy. They dealt in orders, in objectives, and survival.
Mercy was a luxury of peacetime, of people who had never held a rifle. But here it was in the form of crayon drawings and crooked handwriting. Children who did not know him, who had no reason to care, offering him something he had not known he was starving for. The simple acknowledgement that he was still human. Months passed. Winter came, and with it, cold that seeped through the thin walls. The prisoners were given coats and blankets, and the meals grew heartier, soups and bread that steamed in the frigid air. The letters continued, a steady trickle of innocence into a world that had forgotten what innocence looked like. Lucy's letters arrived less frequently now, but when they did, they were treasures. She told him about Christmas, about a tree her family decorated with popcorn strings and paper stars. She sent him a drawing of herself in a red dress standing beside a snowman. "I made this for you," she had written. The 31-year-old pinned the drawing above his cot, smoothing the edges with care. Other men did the same, until the barracks walls were covered in crayon worlds, bright splashes of color against the dull wood. It was absurd. Grown men, soldiers, decorating their prison with children's art. And yet, it felt like the only sane thing in an insane world. One night, as snow fell softly outside, the 31-year-old sat with Lucy's latest letter in his lap. She had asked, "What do you want for Christmas?" He stared at the question, his throat tight. What did he want? To undo the war. To take back every bullet fired, every order followed. To return to the man he had been before blood and fire taught him that mercy was weakness. But those were impossibilities. He picked up his pencil and wrote slowly. "Dear Lucy, I want to go home. I want to see my family again. I want to be forgiven. Thank you for your letters. They have been a light in a dark place. Your friend." He folded the letter, sealing it with hands that no longer trembled. When he handed it to the guard for mailing, he felt something shift inside him. Not redemption, not yet, but the faint possibility that it might exist somewhere beyond the wire. Spring came, and with it, news of repatriation. The war was over, truly over, and prisoners were being sent home in waves. The 31-year-old stood in line with the others, clutching a small bundle of belongings. Among them were Lucy's letters, carefully folded and tied with string. He had debated leaving them behind, afraid they would be confiscated or lost, but he could not. They were proof that even in the darkest moment, a child had seen him and chosen kindness. The journey home was long, the ship crowded with men who spoke little and avoided each other's eyes. When land finally appeared on the horizon, the 31-year-old felt no joy, only dread. What awaited him? A family that might not want him? A country that would never forget his shame? The port was chaos. Crowds surging, officials shouting, families searching for familiar faces. The 31-year-old disembarked slowly, his legs unsteady. He scanned the crowd, not expecting to see anyone. His mother was old, the journey would have been impossible. His sister, if she still lived, would not have known he was coming. But there, at the edge of the crowd, he saw her. Older, thinner. Her hair pulled back in a simple knot. She held a paper crane in her hand, just like the one she had given him years ago. When their eyes met, she did not run. She simply bowed, deeply. And when she straightened, tears streamed down her face.
He walked to her slowly, each step weighted with years. When he reached her, he bowed in return, lower than protocol demanded, a bow of apology and gratitude and unbearable relief. She reached out, hesitant, and touched his arm. "Brother," she whispered, "you came back." He nodded, unable to speak. In his hand he clutched Lucy's letters, the paper worn soft from handling. His sister glanced at them, curious, but did not ask. Not yet. There would be time, perhaps, to explain. Time to tell her about a child who had written to a stranger, who had asked if he liked dogs, who had drawn him pictures of snowmen and rainbows. Time to tell her that mercy, when offered by the innocent, could crack open even the most hardened heart. Years later, long after the wounds of war had scarred over, but never fully healed, the 31-year-old, now older, grayer, a man who had learned to live with his ghosts, sat at a small table in his rebuilt home. In front of him lay a box, its contents precious beyond measure. Letters, dozens of them, creased and faded, but still legible. He unfolded one carefully, the paper crackling softly. Lucy's handwriting, large and earnest. "I hope you are not scared." He had never written back after his return. How could he explain what her letters had done? How they had reminded him, when he had forgotten, that he was more than the sum of his actions, that even enemies could see each other as human. He did not know if Lucy remembered him. She would be grown now, a woman with her own life, her own concerns. Perhaps she had written to dozens of prisoners, her kindness scattered like seeds across an ocean. Perhaps his letters were forgotten in some